The night in the Sahel is never truly silent. It breathes. Warm winds scrape across the thorny acacia trees, carrying with them the faint metallic clink of something or someone moving just beyond the reach of sight. And here lies the paradox. A land that feels still beneath the daytime sun becomes one of the most dangerous frontiers on Earth once darkness falls. Maps stop mattering, borders fade. What remains is a shifting maze, where visibility is a luxury and sound becomes the only compass. Between 2021 and 2024, nighttime assaults tripled across the central Sahel. Small groups without uniforms or insignias learned to treat the darkness not as cover, but as a weapon. In villages scattered across the frontier, people whisper the same truth. The real war begins when the lights go out. So the question rises, who owns the night in the Sahel? And what happens in the hours when the world looks away? Stay with us. This is not just a military account, it is a descent into a battlefield without straight lines. Subscribe and walk with us through the shadows. To understand the night raids of the Sahel, we must first understand the terrain. Not the geography drawn in atlases, but the living landscape that shapes every decision made after sunset. The frontier stretching from central Mali to northern Burkina and onward to southwestern Niger is not a single line. It is a vast canvas of blurred boundaries. Forests of acacia thin into hard soil. Sand dunes swallow footpaths. Dry riverbeds, empty for 9 months of the year, become secret highways for those who know where to step. Here, the concept of control is fragile. In daylight, villages appear calm, almost motionless. Women grinding millet, children chasing goats across dusty courtyards, elders sitting beneath roofs of woven grass. But as dusk grows heavier, the same villages transform. Doors are bolted earlier, lanterns are dimmed, conversations are whispered. The night does not simply arrive, it takes over. Between 2010 and 2024, the pattern became unmistakable. Attacks once conducted sporadically during the day shifted overwhelmingly into the dark. The reasons were practical, tactical, and deeply psychological. Small groups, 4, 6, sometimes a dozen, could move faster at night. They could follow goat tracks invisible to outsiders. They could appear without warning and vanish before any organized response arrived. A single burst of gunfire could empty an entire settlement. A single torchlight could betray an entire patrol. This was not conventional war. It was mobility against structure, shadows against visibility, a battlefield without fronts or flanks. Local commanders across the Sahel began to speak of a new phrase: the frontier dissolves after sunset. What they meant was simple. No state, no force, no institution could claim a line on the map as truly theirs once night fell. Darkness leveled the playing field, turning military superiority into uncertainty. The Sahel's rural zones rarely have electricity. Entire districts plunge into total blackness each evening. There are no street lamps, no fences with motion sensors, no surveillance systems humming quietly behind concrete walls. A single torch beam travels far and exposes more than it illuminates. Groups operating at night exploited 3 conditions: silence of terrain, dry soil absorbs footsteps, wind masks movement, no machines or roads break the stillness, lack of illumination. Even military posts often operate with minimal lighting to avoid detection, inadvertently limiting their own visibility. Route familiarity. Those born in these regions know the exact location of termite mounds, dry wells, thorny bushes, and cattle paths, details invisible to outsiders and nearly impossible to map. By 2024, analysts estimated that over 70% of violent incidents in central Sahel occurred between 7 p.m. and 4 a.m. The pattern was too consistent to dismiss as coincidence. Night had become doctrine. Most raids are brief, 3 to 7 minutes. They follow a rhythm honed over years. Approach. The attackers move in near silence. No headlights, no engines, only the sound of cloth brushing against branches. Entry. They strike a checkpoint, a granary, a village square, or a small military outpost. The first sound is almost always decisive. Shock. The first 30 seconds matter most. Gunfire erupts, doors slam, people scatter. Uncertainty spreads faster than bullets. Exit. Before reinforcement arrives, the attackers are gone, fading into the same darkness they came from. For those living in frontier villages, the fear is not only the attack itself, it is the uncertainty of when it will happen again. Children learn to sleep lightly. Adults arrange night watches, rotating silently in the dark, armed with little more than torches and resolve. These night raids expose a deeper truth. Conventional state borders lose meaning in the Sahel. A village may be in one country, a grazing field in another, and a water well in a third. Communities move freely. Attackers move even more freely. At night, the frontier becomes a single, continuous zone where movement is limited only by knowledge of the land. Satellite images show vast stretches without roads or settlements. But on the ground, countless micropaths exist, used by herders, traders, travelers, and increasingly armed groups. These paths form a hidden web that no map has ever fully captured. This is why night raids spread so quickly from Mali to Burkina and to Niger. Not because groups grew stronger, but because the terrain allowed them to move without being seen. Night warfare is not only physical, it is psychological. A single rumor of footsteps outside a village can disrupt an entire night's sleep. A single flash of light on a hill can send families gathering their children and livestock. The fear is cumulative. It stacks night after night. Communities must live with the truth outsiders often overlook. After sunset, they cannot rely on distance, fences, or outposts. They rely on awareness, intuition, and the memory of how the land sounds when danger approaches. For soldiers deployed to these zones, the challenge is equally immense. They must defend territories where their visibility is limited, their response time uncertain, and their knowledge of terrain weaker than that of their adversaries. And yet, for all this complexity, the night remains predictable in one way. The opening move rarely changes. Tonight, somewhere along a quiet stretch of the frontier, a small group tightens the straps of their rifles, preparing to slip into the darkness where maps end and the real war begins. To understand the true intensity of Sahel night raids, one must step inside a single moment, a single operation where every sound, every second, every misstep can decide the fate of an entire village. What follows is not the story of one specific night, but the distilled anatomy of dozens observed between 2022 and 2024. A pattern repeated with such precision that it has become a signature of asymmetrical warfare in the region. The raid often begins long before the target realizes danger is near. A small group, never more than 10 or 12, moves through the scrublands. Their torches are switched off, their phones removed or dismantled, their clothes wrapped in cloth to avoid metal, clicking against metal. They rely on memory, the kind passed down by herders and travelers who walked these lands before borders existed. They know which thorn bushes are brittle, which sand patches sink noiselessly, which dry riverbed curves around the back of a settlement. Their advantage is not strength but fluency. Fluency in the landscape, in the dark, in the fear of those who wait behind wooden doors. A veteran village watchman once said, "The night belongs to whoever understands its rhythm," and in most cases, that rhythm is mastered by the attackers. Most raids begin with a single, decisive sound. Sometimes it is a burst of gunfire. Sometimes the crack of a door forced open. Sometimes the sudden, piercing whistle of a signal call. But whatever form it takes, it is designed to shatter predictability. For the first 30 seconds, confusion reigns supreme. Windows are shut. Children are pulled under beds. Armed guards shout to one another but struggle to determine direction. Visibility is nearly zero. The attackers exploit this moment ruthlessly. They know the defenders are not fighting one enemy. They are fighting uncertainty. Military reports from frontier zones repeatedly describe the same pattern. Defenders hesitate for 3 to 5 seconds. Attackers advance for 3 to 5 seconds. A checkpoint or resource point falls in less than 1 minute. The night magnifies everything. A small group feels like an army. A single gunshot echoes like a volley. Fear moves faster than sound. Contrary to what many imagine, most night raids are brutally short, 3 to 7 minutes. That is the average window of destruction. Within this narrow frame, the group completes its objectives. Overrun a checkpoint, seize supplies, burn a granary, extract information, deliver a message simply by appearing and vanishing. By the time reinforcements begin to mobilize, the attackers are already deep in the bush, following paths that cannot be traced on satellite images. It is not the speed of the getaway that protects them. It is the darkness swallowing their tracks. A local commander described it in stark terms. We do not lose them because they run fast. We lose them because the night protects those who know it. For state forces, the response is a race against uncertainty. A patrol must first determine the direction of attack: north, west, towards the riverbed, toward the grazing fields. Sound bounces unpredictably in the Sahel, ricocheting off dry earth and distant hills. A gunshot heard in one direction may have come from another entirely. The absence of night vision equipment in many rural outposts cripples the defenders even further. What is clear at daytime becomes invisible after dusk. A shadow could be a tree could be a person could be a rumor. And so, during the first minute of reaction, state forces often make the only rational choice available: pull civilians into safe structures, secure the perimeter, and avoid chasing shadows into terrain they cannot navigate. It is not cowardice, it is survival. In many raids, the decisive element is neither firepower nor numbers but psychology. The attackers move with intent. The defenders move with doubt. The attackers choose the moment. The defenders react to it. The attackers know their escape routes. The defenders often know only the roads. And in this imbalance, the night becomes a weapon more effective than any rifle. From interviews collected in the frontier towns, a recurring testimony emerges. One villager said, "We fear the gun less than the footsteps. When we hear footsteps in the dark, we know the gun will follow." The terror lives in anticipation, not in the event itself. After the brief explosion of chaos, the quiet returns almost instantly. Smoke drifts. A lantern swings on a rope. Dogs bark late. Families count their children. Guards whisper to each other, unsure whether the danger is truly gone or merely repositioned. In some cases, reinforcements arrive to find nothing but footprints and spent cartridges. In others, they find messages carved into wood or burnt into walls, symbols, warnings, declarations of power. When undeniable truth emerges, night raids are not only tactical, they are political signals, sent through action rather than words. But in the Sahel, the end of gunfire is never the end of the story, because the most decisive battles begin only after the silence returns. Night raids in the Sahel do not end when the attackers fade into the bush. Their real impact begins after the silence returns, inside the households, inside the political imagination of the region, and inside the fragile social fabric stitched together by generations. What looks like a 7-minute assault on the outside is, for the communities who endure it, a force that reshapes every hour of their lives. In frontier villages, fear becomes part of the architecture. Parents rearrange sleeping mats so the children rest farthest from doors. Windows are covered with cloth, not for privacy, but so torchlight cannot betray movement inside. People stop gathering in courtyards after dark, robbing the community of the stories and conversations that once tied them together. Many villages establish informal night committees, groups of men who rotate keeping watch. They sit in silence, listening for footsteps, wind, or the sudden hush that falls when animals sense danger. These watchmen rarely sleep more than 2 or 3 hours. Their exhaustion accumulates like layers of dust on the floor. Psychologists working in displaced persons camps describe a familiar pattern: children startled by any loud noise at night, women waking repeatedly to check the door. Men refusing to sleep indoors, choosing to rest near thresholds or courtyards. The trauma is not cinematic, it is quiet, repetitive, and relentless. When night raids become frequent, the state loses more than checkpoints. It loses presence. Villagers begin to rely on their own vigilance rather than on distant authorities. This is not rebellion, it is survival. In some areas, local committees form their own watch networks, creating early warning signals by banging metal, blowing cow horns, or flashing lights between rooftops. These systems often work better than centralized command posts precisely because they run on local memory and local trust. What emerges is a landscape of gray zones. Territories not declared lost, but subtly withdrawn from. A village still flies the national flag, but the flag no longer means the same thing after sunset. A military officer summarized the dilemma: "We may hold the land during the day, but they hold the sky after dusk." Once this dynamic sets in, control becomes psychological rather than territorial. People assess safety not by what the state says, but by what the night feels like. Markets close earlier. Weddings end before sunset. Farmers stop tending fields that require early morning or late evening work, reducing harvests and weakening food security. When light becomes fear, economic life shrinks. Women fetching water at dusk move in groups of 10 or more. Shepherds returning from grazing grounds do so in tight clusters, singing loudly so their voices carry. Even animals sense the shift. Herders claim goats grow restless on nights when raids feel imminent. Night raids also fracture the bond between neighboring villages. Where once people crossed paths freely, now they hesitate to move even 2 kilometers after sunset. Rumors travel faster than facts, sowing mistrust. Why was that village unharmed? Who knew the attacker's route? Why did their lights stay on longer? Insecurity does not only harm, it isolates. Across the region, leaders recognize that conventional defense models fail in a war built on mobility and darkness. One emerging strategy involves decentralization, granting local communities greater authority in night surveillance, terrain mapping, and rapid alert systems. In this context, the approach associated with Ibrahim Traoré, relying on local defense groups, villagers' terrain knowledge, and community-driven intelligence, has gained visibility across the Sahel. The logic is simple. You cannot defeat a night war with daytime logic. Villagers often know the sound of their land better than soldiers stationed temporarily. They know when the wind is wrong, when animal behavior shifts, when a path has fresh footprints. Modern strategy now aims to merge that ancestral knowledge with newer tools: infrared drones, night cameras, mesh network communication devices. Night raids force an uncomfortable question. Is darkness neutral, or has it become a political actor in itself? For communities, night is no longer just a time of rest. It decides migration. It dictates which roads are safe. It determines whether children attend school the next morning or whether families must flee before dawn. Some villages report going months without a single night of uninterrupted sleep across the entire community. Others say the fear of footsteps in the dark is worse than the raids themselves. When a government loses the night, even partially, it loses something deeper than territory. It loses rhythm, confidence, and the perception of protection. The Sahel's night war creates 3 layers of emotion: outrage at the violence, sorrow for the disrupted lives, and a fragile hope rooted in communities refusing to surrender their evenings forever. Hope is found in small gestures: watchmen who refuse to abandon their post, mothers who light a single lantern despite the fear, elders who teach younger men old paths and old signs, villages that return to their fields at dawn no matter what. These acts seem small, but in a war designed to erode confidence, they are acts of defiance. But a new force is rising, one learning not just to endure the night, but to see through it. And when that happens, the balance of darkness may shift forever. From afar, the Sahel's night war appears like a local conflict, remote, rugged, contained within desert borders. But to diplomats, intelligence analysts, and security observers across the globe, These night raids expose a deeper reality. The world is entering an era where asymmetrical warfare can redraw maps without ever needing to seize a capital. The African Union's Peace and Security Council has repeatedly described the Sahel as the most rapidly evolving zone of nonlinear conflict on the continent. Their reports emphasize how night raids bypass conventional peacekeeping models. Blue helmet missions are designed for daylight patrols, fortified bases, and predictable front lines, none of which apply in this theater. As one AU advisor put it, you cannot patrol what you cannot see, and you cannot stabilize what moves at night. For ECOWAS, the situation is politically sensitive. The bloc's credibility has already been strained by coups in several member states. Opening a new front or deploying large forces risks escalation, while inaction invites insecurity to spill southward into states like Benin, Togo, and Ghana. Thus, ECOWAS now frames the Sahel as a regional security metabolism, a system whose shockwaves eventually reach coastal nations, whether they intervene or not. For Europe, the stakes are practical and immediate. Instability in the Sahel intensifies concerns about migration, trade routes, and the spread of armed groups toward the Mediterranean corridor. EU security documents warn that night raids, though localized, form part of a broader trend: micro-conflicts with macro consequences. European analysts note that when rural regions empty at night, governance erodes, and extremist actors find ungoverned spaces in which to thrive. The United States approaches the Sahel through data, satellite imagery, signals, intelligence, and partnerships aimed at countering non-state armed groups. Yet its footprint in the region has diminished, and without ground proximity, night warfare becomes difficult to assess in real time. American analysts see the Sahel as a stress test for 21st century conflict, where small units challenge state militaries more effectively than conventional armies ever could. One defense official summarized it plainly: "This is the kind of conflict where technology matters, but only if you understand the terrain." Across international think tanks, a new observation is emerging. Some states are developing decentralized security models that combine local militias, community mapping, and drone surveillance. Among these cases, Burkina Faso is frequently referenced as a laboratory of asymmetrical defense, where community intelligence is not a supplement, but a core doctrine. This shift is closely monitored worldwide as it challenges the assumption that modern security must always be centralized. What the world sees in the Sahel is not simply instability, it is a preview of the wars that will define remote regions in decades ahead. Conflicts fought in unmarked spaces, with small groups using mobility rather than mass and darkness rather than armor. And while major powers debate frameworks and resolutions, the night continues its slow, quiet advance across villages that must survive until dawn. But the darkness will not go unchallenged for long, because a new wave of tools is about to enter the Sahel, and technology rarely enters a battlefield quietly. In the Sahel, the future is not written in treaties or speeches, it is written in the long hours between dusk and dawn. The night steals, fractures, intimidates, but it can also be reclaimed. As communities, defense groups, and state forces adapt, three possible paths begin to emerge, each shaped by a different balance of courage, technology, and human memory. In this outcome, attacks grow more frequent and more sophisticated. Small groups learn to coordinate across villages, using spotters and triangulated signals. They strike deeper into territories once deemed safe. Darkness spreads not just as a physical condition, but as a psychological frontier, an expanding zone where uncertainty rules. This scenario is the most destructive because it feeds on silence. If left unchecked, the night becomes an institution in itself, governing movement, choices, and entire districts. This is the most likely path in the near term. Neither the state nor hostile groups fully dominate the darkness. Villages continue forming watch committees. Armed groups continue testing weaknesses. Soldiers fortify positions rather than roam them. The night becomes a contested territory, sometimes safe, sometimes hostile, never predictable. In this equilibrium, people learn to live between threat and resilience, adjusting their routines to a world where conflict overlaps with daily life. It is a world of half-lights and half-measures, where dawn brings relief, but not certainty. This is the scenario many in the Sahel quietly work toward. It depends on merging ancestral knowledge with new technologies, infrared drones that hover silently above grazing fields, community maps that mark suspicious paths, mesh networks that keep villages connected even without mobile coverage. It depends on trust between villagers and local defense groups, between commanders and communities, between those who know the land and those who must protect it. Reclaiming the night does not mean turning darkness into daylight. It means reshaping its meaning. It means that footsteps in the dark no longer trigger fear, but alertness. It means that villagers can sleep without waiting for the sudden rupture of gunfire. It means the night becomes what it once was, restful, still, and human. Hope in the Sahel does not arrive with fanfare. It arrives in the steady whir of a drone camera, in the watchman who refuses to abandon his post, in the farmer who walks to his fields before sunrise, in villages where, slowly, the night begins to lose its absolute power. Conflict may reshape the land, but the people of the Sahel reshape the meaning of resilience. And resilience, once awakened, spreads further than fear. And as tomorrow's sun rises over the acacia trees, one truth becomes clear. The daylight may look unchanged, but the battlefield that awaits within the next night will not be the same. In the vastness of the Sahel, wars are not always decided by armies, borders, or declarations. Many are shaped in the quietest hours of the night, those moments when villages hold their breath, when watchmen listen for footsteps, and when every flicker of lantern light feels like a fragile act of defiance. The night raids of the borderlands are small in scale, yet immense in consequence. They remind us that conflict does not need to roar to alter history. Sometimes it only needs to whisper. Yet even in these shadowed spaces, a different truth endures. The people of the Sahel have never surrendered their horizons. They adapt, they resist, they protect one another in ways that rarely reach headlines. In their silence lives a kind of courage unique to frontier communities, those who rebuild after every dusk and rise again at every dawn. Across research centers and command rooms, analysts study this conflict as a case of asymmetrical warfare. But on the ground, it is something more human, a struggle for the right to rest, to sleep, to live without fear of footsteps in the dark. And as new strategies emerge, local defense networks, community mapping, drones scanning the desert, the night begins slowly to lose its monopoly on power. In some regions, these shifts are inspired by leaders who argue that sovereignty must reach even the most remote villages. For many observers, the renewed security experiments linked to Ibrahim Traoré demonstrate how community-led defense can change what is possible in isolated frontiers. And for those watching the wider Sahel, the evolution of Burkina Faso has become a signal that darkness is not an unbreakable force, it is simply an unchallenged one. The question that remains is not military, it is human. When the night falls again, will fear command the silence, or will resilience learn to speak louder? The future of the Sahel will not be written only in capitals, but in these quiet borderlands where people confront the unknown with unwavering resolve. And as new alliances form and strategies deepen, one belief spreads across the frontier, that the night can be reclaimed not suddenly but steadily, the way light returns after a long eclipse. In that journey, hope becomes its own form of resistance. And for many, the vision championed by Ibrahim Traoré offers a reminder that even the smallest communities deserve the protection of dignity. If you believe stories from the shadows matter, stay with us. Subscribe, share your thoughts, and help bring light to the places where silence once ruled.